Hello friends, our third video is the continuation of our Python beginner course. So in this video, we will do lab number 2. So let's start lab number 2. So lab number 2 is basically the title or the objective of lab number 2 is conditional formatting, or sometimes it is referred as conditional statement. So like in every programming language, in Python, we have conditional formatting, which is if else programming. So you sometimes call it as if else logic or if else programming or conditional formatting, or sometimes it is referred as conditional statement. Conditional statements are also the roots of programming and also the roots of AI, which is artificial intelligence. So whenever you want to create a logic in your programming, the very first thing you implement it is conditional formatting. Like if you want to decide in between two things, and you have to decide a decision that whether from option 1 or option B, you have to select on basis of some criteria. So you use if-else logic. So the very first thing which is very important in if-else logic is to understand the difference between, there are three types of logics. One is if and else, that's completely understandable. That let's take an example. If you have a path on the right, so you will go on right. If you don't have a path, you will go towards the left. That's a very simple statement we all can understand. But there is one more thing, that is if, elif, multiple elif, and then at the end you can use else, which means if you have more than one condition, so definitely you will go for if, elif, and else. So if you have only two decisions, let's take an example, either yes or no. So you will go for if and else. But what if you have more than two decisions? So if you have more than two decisions, which means if you have multiple decisions, so there are two things which are in programming specifically used. One is if, else, elif, and else. And the second is multiple if. So the first difference which we highlighted was the difference between if else and if, elif, else, if, which is if you have two conditions, you will use if else. If you have more than two conditions, you will use if, elif, else, if. But what should I use between if, elif, else, and if? That's the very great question everyone should ask. So it all depends upon your processing power. So if, elif, else checks your condition turn by turn. So let's take an example. We will go with the same example. If you don't have a path towards the right direction, so is there a path on the front direction? If there's a path on the front direction, you will not look after the third direction as well, that is left. You will directly go to the straight path. But in if you have multiple scopes, which means you are doing multitasking, you have to see all the directions, and on the basis of your logic, you have to decide which direction you should go for. So by explanation, you can assume one thing, that if basically takes very short time, but it takes a lot of processing power. Whereas if takes a lot of time in deciding, and but the processing power is very low, because at a single time it is actually working on a single logic. It's not working on more than one logic. So let's start with an example. So before we start, we have to use these following logical operators in our coding as well. So double equals to is the same to compare two numbers. Not equals to is exclamation mark equals to, less than sign, greater than sign, less than and equals to, greater than and equals to. So these are the conditions that are used in most commonly in if else statement, and specifically in the loop. So let's start with the first example, which is a is equals to 33 and b is equals to 200. So we'll directly dive into the coding section. So we have to make a new file because this is another lab. So we'll rename it as lab 2. And then in lab 2, you have to write a logic. Let's take an example. If a is equals to 56, I am writing a random logic. B is equals to 96. Now I want to identify which number is greater than which number. So I will write a logic if a is greater than b. So then there is a word, the syntax is you have to write if, then you have to write the condition, and then after the condition you have to write colon, which is a very well-known thing in Python. Then after colon, if you will press enter, so you will see a magic over here. See, the code actually started in between, which means it has, taken some spaces and then the code is starting, which means this is an indentation. So in Python, the famous error which appears is indentation. So you can see in the lab manual, here there was no space. So it gives me an indentation error. But see here, there was a space. So in the space, you will not get the error, but if you will not give the spaces, so you will get an indentation error. In C programming, we were habitual of using curly brackets, so it was very fine for us. But here, logic matters a lot. So if A is greater than B, which means it's print, and you will ask, and you will write that, of course, if A is greater than B, so you can write A is greater than B. That completely makes sense. Now, else, which means we are going for the first condition, if and else, then you have to write enter, same colon, and then you have to press enter. Print, of course, if A is greater than B in the first condition, or if the first condition is not justified, then of course B is greater than A. That completely makes sense. So you will write over here B is greater than A. So there, that makes a complete sense. Now, if you will run this code, so definitely you will get B is greater than A, and we can see 96 is greater than A. If we change the number like 2 over here and then we run it again, so see the answer is different. But what do you think? Which type of programming is this? Static or dynamic? Just think for a while. Yes, so this type of programming is basically static programming because the inputs are defined. They will never change until and unless you change it intentionally. What if I want to make it dynamic? So as you already studied it previously, you will write integer and then you will write input and then you will write a message. That message could be anything like enter your first number. Okay. And same goes with the B as well. I will not waste time. I will just copy this. I will paste it over here. Instead of first, you will write second number. So now if I run this code, so now see now it's a dynamic code. Now it depends upon the user that what number he or she is adding. So if I will add randomly 25 and then the next number is 89. So I should expect that second number should be greater than first number. So see, B is greater than A, which means my code is now a little bit intelligent than the previous code, which means using conditional formatting, I have made a AI algorithm to differentiate between, smaller number and larger number. If I run this again, so it will ask me the numbers again, which means it's a dynamic code. Every time when I run this code, it will ask me again and again. So that's this time I will write 21 and 2. So A is greater than B. So that how logical operators works, that how conditional statements actually work. If the condition is true, so it will print the above message. If it's not true, it will go to else. Now let's take an example. Randomly, I'm quoting this thing that if you run this code and you write 22 is the first number and you write 22 as the second number. Now see, this is what I never expected. It's written B is greater than A. That's not possible because both numbers are equal. Now you will get a clue in your mind that when your two conditions are not getting fulfilled, then you introduce a third condition in your programming using if, elif, else, or multiple if. So I will write this code with both of the examples. So I will not edit over here. I will copy over here. I will paste it over here. And then I will add a new condition. So instead of else, I will write elif. With elif, you have to mention a condition. So elif B is greater than A. And now I will add a third condition, that is else, which means if above two conditions are not fulfilled, then of course, third would be the answer. So print, you will write over here, A and B are equal. Now, if I run this code, then I will write 22 and 22. Now see, A and B are equal, which means my code is now intelligent enough to identify two numbers, whether they are greater than or less than, or whether they are equal. So this is a little bit, improvisation. So that is how things work in Python programming. First, you start with if-else logic, then gradually, as you get problems in your code, or else you get complexity, or you get challenges in your code, you start opting, upgrading your code. And once you upgrade your code, the code of course get complex sometime, but it is actually working according to your need. So this was an example of if, elif, and else. What if I use, if I want to do the same example, but not with if, elif, else, I want to do it with if. So you have to just copy this code and then you have to paste it here. And then instead of if A is greater than B, you can write, sorry, you have to write the same thing. Instead of elif, you will write if, and in the last else, because if it's multiple if, you have to write if everywhere. So if A is equals to B. Now that makes sense. Now if I run this code and if I write 21 and 21, see, it's working, which means this code and this code is not different. It's completely same. But the important thing which you need to understand is the above code is done according to the logic of if, elif, else. Elif means else if, and the down if is done with multiple if. What is basically the understanding or the technical understanding between these two codes is basically in the above code, the time is, the time is more, but the processing power is low. In the down code over here in multiple if, the processing power is very high, but the time is very short because it is checking multiple conditions at a single time. So that's the difference between using if, else, and multiple if. Now let's go back to the manual. So this is an example. You can follow the example. You will raise an indentation error, so we can introduce an indentation error, but just backspace this and see, you'll find an error. So the indentation error means that there should be an indentation, there should be a gap after if statement, and you haven't mentioned it. So let's do it again and then run it again and then see the code is working fine. So this is the example of if, elif. Same goes with the third example. So you can see it's written 33. So the first thing which should click on your mind is this is a static code. This is not a dynamic code. So every time, see, it's a good practice that you do dynamic coding, because dynamic coding allows you to iterate a lot of time and you can identify a lot of errors while implementing dynamic coding. Then there is if. Now the last and the very important thing of this lab is and or gate. So there are two types of gates that are used in programming, in every programming language. Although there are three types of gate, but we will not use the third gate right now, but we can use it later on. The two types of gate is AND gate and OR gate. And those who are from electronics background, they know AND gate and OR gate a lot. And there are few more gates that are driven from AND gate and OR gate. We can use it as well. So the syntax remains the same, only the pattern changes. So AND is used when you want both conditions to be true, and OR is used when you want one condition to be true. So let's do a quick example of this. So I will use the same code, Control C, Control V, but instead of if, I will write, now let's take an example, you have two numbers. So instead of two numbers, you can write one numbers. So let's take an example. I want to decide whether the number is positive or negative, okay? Or I have to define a scale. So you can write if A is greater than 0, if A is greater than 0, then you can write print the number is positive, okay? The number is positive. And then in the else, you can write print the number is negative. The number is out of range. I will not write negative, I will write out of range. Why? Now let's take an example. I'm asking user a age. So I will write enter your age. Now see, it's an obvious thing. The age cannot be minus number, of course. That completely makes sense. and the age could not be higher than 100, I believe right now in this code. It could be, of course, higher than 100, but like we can just justify over here that the person is not above 100. So I will just introduce a criteria that the age, the a variable should be greater than 0 and it should be less than 100. So I will write less than 100, or you can say less than or equals to 100, because we will considering 100 as part of our criteria. So if the age is between 0 to 100, then only it will print the number is positive, or the age is it makes sense, else the number is out of age. So let's run this code and I will write a age 25. So the number is positive, it's completely fine. If I run this code and I write minus 25, so see the number is out of range. What if I write 102? So see, still it's giving me the error, the number is out of range. Why? Because I have introduced one thing in my code, that is AND logic. Now same with AND, you can use OR logic as well. So you can just copy this code and with this you can write. So instead of AND you can write OR, and you can change the logic that if the number is less than 0 or the number is greater than 100. Okay, so anything is possible. The number is out of range. So of course that doesn't make any sense over here, but just for the sake of understanding, I'm writing this. It's the similar code above one, and the number is in range. Okay, so there might be an error in this code. Let's see. Just to clarify you one thing. See 21 and then you run and then you write minus 28. So see, if the number is less than 0 or the number is greater than 100, which means any number that exists greater than 100 or any number that exists less than 100 is part of out of range, and between that range, of course, it will come towards the else loop and the number is in range. So this is how you implement all logic in your code. I believe you understand the fundamentals of Python programming. You can do the following codes over here. So there are 3 codes. Write a Python program to test whether the user is eligible to cast the vote or not. So of course the minimum criteria to cast a vote is a specific age. I would not give you the clue, but you have to do it on your own. Second is write a Python code to compare two numbers between two numbers, whether they are equal, greater or less than. So just a hint, we have already done this. And third is write a Python program to check whether the character is vowel or consonant. So this is something new. So if you want to compare a variable with something, so instead of 0, you have to write like this, equals to inverted commas a. So whenever you are comparing a variable, a string or a character with a variable, so you have to just change the number with the string or the character, and you have to write it in inverted commas. That's the biggest hint I can give it to you right now, and you can write your vowel and consonant code. If it's not working, I will definitely try to upload the solutions of the code in the comments in the description section as well, so you can see it from there as well. So hope you are getting now you're understanding what it is all about. So just practice it as much as you can.